So I'm James Croft, and I'm the Executive Director of the Centre for the Study of Market Reform of Education, which is a think tank, policy research think tank based in Westminster. And I am the author of this report, taking a lead how to access the leadership premium. So essentially taking the lead is an overview of the field of leadership studies, which is a fairly vast field of literature, and it's an attempt to try to make that fairly complex field more accessible and to a broader readership, and also to sort of bring a fairly sort of incisive sort of eye to that literature in search of what the rigorous evidence really says about the effectiveness of what makes for effective leaders. So one of the things that you can observe as you taking the overview of the body of leadership research is that there is a very strong attachment both among researchers, and this mirrors the sort of popular psychology around leadership and popular understanding of leadership. There is a tendency to overstate the importance of the leader. And in the educational context, the way this manifests itself essentially is that leaders are seen as being key to having a direct impact on educational outcomes, which bypasses, of course, a whole lot of stuff. This is the way leadership is discussed in the qualitative literature, the theories around leadership, the great man theory, the transformational leader, and this sort of thing. They come in, they do their stuff happens, you've got school improvement, ta-da. And of course, this overlooks all kinds of issues. It overlooks the means by which leaders have exercised the influence that they have, the mediating factors in the school context, the primary one, of course, being teachers. But it also overlooks the contextual nature of much of what goes for making a leader successful. The various supporting and enabling things about a school context which actually enable leaders to succeed. So we have invested an awful lot in policy terms, but also in terms of the way we train and develop leaders in the idea of the hero head. And this has a number of consequences which aren't entirely helpful. It tends to, it's essentially an effort to build a national policy based on exceptions to the rule. I mean, the very thing that makes for a hero head, a charismatic, standout, transformational leader, is that they have apparently attributes that are unusual. And you can't build national policy on that kind of basis. And the effort to actually inculcate attributes of leadership, of those kinds of leadership types in others, which are heavily related to personality, the effort to learn sort of leadership styles or characteristics hasn't been terribly successful. Added to which fact, despite more than a decade of heavy investment in national strategies for developing leaders in the UK context, and this is true of other contexts also, we haven't really got any real understanding about what, if anything, has worked in the way of what we've invested in leadership development. So we need to get right away from that understanding. What we need to do is we need to pay much more attention to the mechanisms, the means by which leaders exert their influence, the enabling of factors, the contextual factors. And it's only when we start to do that, and we actually start to really observe leaders what key decisions they make, their patterns of decision making and practice that consolidate their key strategic decisions, that we will, over time, that we will begin to actually be able to distill what some of those key practices might be, and then move on to field experiments where we can actually examine what impact they have in practice. So there's a long way to go for leadership research. What the question is what do we do in the meantime? Because we've got schools to run. You can't just sit and wait for research that might never materialize. So what I advocate in the report is that it's long overdue time that we moved to a model that was school-based and leader-led, leader and demand-led, in terms of how the context for identifying leaders and for developing them. The most, certainly there's no basis for thinking that if school leaders can't figure out how to create appropriate leadership opportunities for emerging leaders, and what's going to be useful to train them up, there's no basis for thinking that central government is going to be any more able to do that. So we need to see investment in a school-based model. And what I'd like to see is that effectively we turn right around how the deployment of leadership expertise works. So instead of sending in hero heads, which we do in countless ways as school improvement consultants, national leaders of education and this sort of thing, who go in an essentially unaccountable framework, providing advice that is being foisted on school leaders in more challenging circumstances, without any accountability for what happens when they implement it. What we need to see is we need to actually see those that need the help being enabled to go to leaders of similar schools, profiled similarly, and to have opportunities to spend time with them effectively, peer-to-peer, shadowing those leaders, looking for clues, looking for what they might be able to do differently, and then them thinking through how this then applies within their school context for which they are responsible. So it's essentially a consultancy model of how you access leadership expertise, and that expertise needs to be shared in situ. Leaders are, like all experts, I suppose, can be very good at going off and pontificating about what they do. But what's really going to be useful is actually seeing them do it. And in the same way, we ought to be identifying leaders in that way also, providing opportunities for mentoring and development in the school context. Now, the missing piece, of course, is that we do need to keep on refreshing leaders' understanding and grasp of the evidence base about what is effective. And as that evidence base grows, then one would hope that you can see the deployment of effective strategy, contextually tailored strategy, that can really be impactful. There's no need for a new certification to do that. So this probably does involve course content, and it probably does actually involve studying the research about what works in context. It should be enough that we have performance-oriented pay progression. It should be enough that you have contracts set by governing bodies with KPI that are oriented to improving outcomes. That should be incentive enough to make sure that you're getting the best strategy as a leader and seeking to implement it. So I'd like to see a complete devolution of policy around how we identify and develop leaders, and I don't feel that that we should be requiring professional qualifications as a requirement of entry into headship. So it's a fairly, it's a real an about face on the present model. But given how little we really do know about, what is effective leadership practice, that is in any way replicable and implementable by others, it would seem to me that the efforts that we're putting in, the money that we're putting into national strategies are not justified.